As global fault lines deepen, London emerges as the epicenter of high diplomacy, hosting both US-China trade talks aimed at averting economic rupture and the Istanbul Route Summit signaling NATO's defense overall. The world teeters between confrontation and containment, reshaping alliances and security doctrines in real time. US and Chinese trade envoys converge on London as the world watches, seeking to salvage a fragile truce in their escalating economic war. With tariffs slashed, but tensions simmering over rare earths, tech restrictions, and broken pledges, this pivotal meeting follows a dramatic phone call between Trump and Xi Jinping, a bid to steer away from full-scale trade conflict and stabilize global markets teetering under the weight of uncertainty. I'm Henny Saif. Let's get in focus. Welcome back. The Washington Post has reported that the US-China trade negotiations, scheduled to begin in London today, are likely to produce at best a limited accord that might slow but not stop the erosion in commercial links between the nations, while leaving Beijing's state capitalist system unchanged. The Chinese government will bring its own demands to the new talks, including a relaxation of US controls on advanced semiconductor exports and aerospace technologies needed for China's C919 commercial aircraft program. US officials have complained that China generates excess production of manufactured goods, which spill over into global markets and hurt the United States, the world's consumer of last resort. Ultimately, the article calls for a pragmatic approach, blending assertive diplomacy with economic resilience. The path forward demands unity, foresight, and adaptive policymaking. And to focus more on the most recent updates concerning the US-China trade talks in London and its implications in this world economic competition, we're joined from Washington by Mr. Peter Tanis, the economist and chairman of Lennox Investment Advisory. Welcome to In Focus, Mr. Tanis. Now, tariffs temporarily slashed, but trust eroded. Can these talks truly prevent a full-scale trade war, or are we witnessing another tactical pause before the next escalation?
Hello, Hanny. It's nice to be with you again.
Pleasure.
But I thought your summary was really quite excellent. And I thought the Washington Post article that you cited, which I also saw this morning, was a bit too negative. I think the first items on the agenda for the meeting are not tariffs. The first thing they will resolve, and you can be very optimistic that this will be resolved, is that China will ease exports of the rare earth that the US needs in our industry, specifically in car industry and defense industry. And simultaneously, the United States will ease export restrictions on some of the advanced chips that China also needs. So before we even get into the tariffs discussion, I think these two items that have come up recently are going to be resolved, and that's a big positive.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you've mentioned, China's dominance and restriction in the rare earth exports and Washington's leverage through the tech and chip restrictions, then which side holds the upper hand in extracting these strategic concessions this time?
Well, neither. The point is that this idea of restricting both is what both need. China produces 90% of the rare earth materials that industrial countries need. So obviously, if you want to talk about an upper hand in that area, they have the upper hand. In terms of advanced chips, the United States has the upper hand. So it pretty much evens out. This is going to be a deal that works very well for both sides, and it's just the beginning. Oh, and don't forget, uh, President Trump's imposition of restrictions on Chinese students coming to the United States. Um, that was probably not very well received in his conversation with President Xi, but I expect we'll see some easing of that as well.
Mhm. Well, is the US demand for structural reforms in China's state capitalist model realistic, or will it remain a symbolic bargaining chip with no real traction on the table?
Yeah, I think you put that very well. And I think symbolic comes closer to the answer than restrictions. We can work within a system where China produces and manufactures and uh, the way they want to under their system. We do it the way we want to under our system, and we can still work out trade. Remember, we import $500 billion worth of goods from China every year. So clearly, this is something that needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved quickly.
Mhm. Mr. Tanis, what impact could potential breakthroughs or breakdowns in London have on the global supply chains, especially in sectors like semiconductors, the electric vehicles, and defense manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if the talks break down, the repercussions would be enormous. First of all, China is the most efficient producer of electric vehicles in the world. They are far more advanced than almost everybody in the world. The United States is an efficient producer of electric vehicles, but the trade restrictions on China on electric vehicles will remain because they would destroy the market. Interestingly, they practically destroyed the market in Europe before Europe put up sanctions, tariffs against them. But this is just one example. Clearly, there's an incentive to get this deal done, and you can expect announcements on the first two items we talked about within a matter of days.
Mhm. Well, with Huawei sanctions and the AI chip restrictions still in place, practically, is the US using trade talks as a cover to slow China's technological rise rather than actually reaching a genuine compromise?
Remember that all of this stuff started with the imposition of tariffs. When Trump went as far as 145% tariffs on China, and then reduced them to 30% when the talks were taking place in Geneva. So this is about tariffs in the long run. And the important thing is that the United States needs tariff revenues, and that is something that we have to keep in mind. Whatever is ultimately decided, the United States will have a minimum of 10% tariffs on just about everything that comes in. You're probably aware that we're having a big fight in Congress now over the president's big, beautiful uh, uh, uh,
Bill.
budget, and that is something that is going to also play into the issue of the revenues needed to close the deficit gap that is already in the bill.
Mhm. Mr. Tanis, can the US realistically decouple strategically while maintaining the economic engagement, or is this dual approach inherently contradictory and unsustainable?
No, it is sustainable and it's doable. And the reason it is because there is no other solution. I mean, a major trade war with one of our biggest partners, China, is not possible. It's a problem that has to be solved, or basically you precipitate a worldwide not only recession but perhaps depression. So one has to be optimistic that these are going to get resolved. And look, we're on the right track. As I said, Watch in the next couple of days for some positive announcements on some agreements, and then we'll see what happens when we get into the tariff discussion.
Mhm. What about the violent incidents that are taking place in Los Angeles regarding the immigration reforms? Do you think they might have any direct or indirect bearing on the meetings in London?
No, the immigration issue is not going to be an issue involved that they're going to discuss in London. Remember, the people in London are the Vice Premier of China and the Secretary of Treasury Bessent, who, by the way, is one of the people that Trump listens to the most, Secretary of Commerce Lutnick, and Trade Negotiator Greer. This is a very high level delegation, but it's entirely focused on business and trade. It will not have an effect. The issue in Los Angeles that we're going through now, the questions that it raises, which are completely different, is whether or not the president should have sent in the National Guard without it being asked for by the governor. Typically, in situations like this, the National Guard goes in at the request of the governor of the state. In this case, President Trump sent them in without the request being coming from the governor.
Mm-hmm. So now we've also heard recently Christine Lagarde saying that the European Union is becoming a much more attractive investment destination rather than US in light of the recent decrees and measures, economic measures the US have been imposing domestically and internationally as well. Does it in any way affect negotiations between the US and China or the US and the European Union?
Yeah, it does, because that what you said is something that is the United States has to be very careful about. We can't keep bantering around these tariffs that change every week or every month. There has to be some resolution to this. Businesses can't operate if they don't know what their costs are going to be from one week to the next. And in the meantime, when the world sees this somewhat chaotic condition in the United States, they start looking elsewhere. And the European Union is a pretty good place to look. So again, these point to the incentives to resolve these issues quickly and get them settled down so that the United States remains the premier investment destination for the rest of the world, which it has been for many decades.
Mr. Peter Tannis, the chairman of Lennox Investment Advisory, thank you very much, sir, for your special insights. And in a high-stakes London summit, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer confronts the urgent call for a quantum leap in defence spending alongside NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte as Russia's shadow looms large. As Washington pressures London to meet rising benchmarks, Europe stands at a pivotal moment, rearming for a future where peace hinges on preparedness. And according to The Guardian, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte's call for a quantum leap in defence readiness signals a strategic shift towards long-term deterrence against Russia. His demand for a 400% increase in air and missile defences underscores the alliance's recognition that Moscow will remain a persistent threat even beyond Ukraine. Rutte emphasises boosting military spending to 5% of GDP, with Britain aligning its plans to strengthen NATO cohesion amid potential US unpredictability under Trump. Restocking depleted arsenals and enhancing logistics are vital to countering Russian military resilience, which remains robust at over 600,000 troops and 6.5% GDP defence spending. Moscow dismisses NATO's moves as provocative, yet Rutte frames them as necessary to counter hybrid threats and ensure collective security. The UK Strategic Review reflects this urgency aiming for battle readiness as Europe braces for a prolonged era of geopolitical confrontation. And to focus more on the recent updates concerning the meeting between Starmer and NATO Secretary General in London to discuss the increased spending defense, we're joined from Brussels by Ms. Kamila Zarikta-Romanovska, the Professor of EU Law and Security Studies. Welcome to In Focus. How critical is the timing of Starmer's meeting with Rutte amid NATO's urgent push for a quantum leap in defense spending and Russia's sustained military posture at 6.5% of GDP?
Well, absolutely. This is a very good question, because here what we can see is the timing is both deliberate and strategically critical. Starmer's early engagement with Rutte, just weeks before the NATO summit in Den Haag, signals a renewed commitment of the United Kingdom to transatlantic defense postulate. With Russia sustaining the defense spending at 6.5 GDP, Starmer's alignment with Rutte calls to a quantum leap. It meant to reassure alliance of a British continuity amid domestic political change, and this change is dramatic as well. This move also strengthens NATO unity in signaling deterrence. On a global level, it reinforces NATO readiness as well to posture and helps dissuade authoritarian challengers from testing allied resolve during a political transition. Therefore, this situation, what we can observe now, is really extremely important and requires deliberate action.
Well, given Washington's pressure on London to hit 3.5% of defense spending by 2035, how might this shifting or changing US political dynamics under Trump influence NATO's cohesion and strategic clarity?
This is an excellent question, because a second Trump administration could really recalibrate NATO dynamics from partnership to conditional engagement. We have to ensure that this is not going really to happen, and we are still in the game. If US leadership becomes more transactional, pressure on European alliance to meet higher defense benchmarks like 3.5 may intensify, potentially straining cohesion. It's really important, however, to ensure that we really invest in our defense. Because for NATO, this would force Europe to step up to not just in capability, but more importantly, in strategic autonomy. Globally, such shifts as such could embolden adversaries and cause hedging behavior among natural or alliance states, weakening alliance-based deterrent architecture in other regions as well. That's the reason why we really actually cannot wait anymore to ensure that we actually are acting and not waiting.
How feasible is it now, with Rutte calling for a 400% surge in air and missile defenses? How feasible is it for NATO members like the UK, currently at 2.33%, to meet these ambitious targets without triggering domestic economic backlash?
Well, that's really a question, how it's going to be possible. But meeting these targets will be challenging without strong political narrative tying defense spending to national security, industrial innovation and job creation. For the UK, for instance, moving from 2.33 towards 3% or beyond will require cross-party consensus and long-term fiscal planning. And unfortunately, Mr. Starmer will have to take into account what Nigel Farage has to say. Moreover, economically, the key is to treat defense investment as a stimulus for industrial modernization. It's not just military expenditure, and this approach should be adopted globally as well. For NATO, this ambition sets a new capability benchmark. Globally, it will as well trigger parallel defense build-ups, especially in Asia or in Gulf, because unless NATO couples the posture with transparent diplomacy, we cannot stay behind.
Ms. Romanovska, now with Fiona Hill's recent remarks about Russia viewing the UK as an adversary and the US as an unreliable partner, is Europe entering a new era where self-reliance becomes the cornerstone of security? They're also dubbing Russia as a constant threat, even post-Ukraine.
Yes. The answer, in my opinion, will be yes, because Hill assessment reflects a growing consensus. Strategic self-reliance is no longer an option for Europe. The war in Ukraine, US unpredictability, intensifying Russia hostility have forced the EU and European NATO members to assume greater operational, industrial, and more importantly, intelligence responsibility. It is in every single aspect. This marked a transition from reliance on US leadership to a more multipolar alliance model. We need to take responsibility for our actions as well as European states, as a NATO states, because globally it encouraged other regions, such as the EU and African Union, to pressure similar resilience strategies, shifting from broader security paradigm to a regional autonomy with multilateral cooperation. And this cooperation between, for instance, Gulf state and NATO, actually, and US as well, actually can be really helpful in order to achieve more coherence within NATO as well, for global sake.
Yes. Well, with Russia dismissing NATO's moves as fear-based policy, could this summit inadvertently deepen the global divisions or serve as a turning point for recalibrating Euro-Atlantic security for decades to come?
Well, this summit could do either or both. If NATO projects unity through strengthen and pairs with diplomatic engagement toward, for instance, the global south and neutral powers, it can serve as generational reset in Euro-Atlantic security, and it's a huge change. However, if this message is solitary and military escalation, it risks reinforcing narratives of Western aggression, potentially deepening as well global division. The long-term impact will hinge on NATO's ability to define security, not just in terms of the weapons, but in terms of stability, law, resilience, and inclusive partnership across regions. That's the reason why we have to do both, actually, because we need to ensure that the security and peace is within not only NATO and Euro-Atlantic states, but as well globally. And global south and the areas of the world where the tensions are extremely, let's say, palpable even, needs to be, let's say, reassured that we are doing all the best to de-escalate conflicts and our action leads to the security of all member states, of all nations, but as well to de-escalation and finishing the war zone everywhere possible.
Well, if NATO is going to be doing its best, Ruth is pushing for restocking millions of artillery shells, thousands of tanks. How will NATO overcome the industrial limitations and the supply chain bottlenecks exposed during the Ukraine war?
Well, first of all, we have to see what are the feasible achievements, because if we're really going to do everything possible, we have to overcome industrial shortfalls and supply chain limits. Because horticulture has stocked millions of shells of thousands of tanks exposed to NATO limited surge capacity. The remedies of this will require always-on munition, industrial reserve capacity, cross-border coordination, and, for instance, via EU Defence Industrial Act, harmonized standards and stockpile policies. And this actually is not only what we need to do, but this is as well when EU need to step in, finally, ensuring that they will do what they're going to do will really ensure the European preparedness. Because let's look honest. We can see here that we can see quite strong signal of post-Brexit strategic re-engagement of the United Kingdom, and that's really important because that will reinforce UK role as a transatlantic pivotal and credible NATO pillar, especially now when, let's say, France is not looked at this as importantly. Moreover, it offers assurance to frontline states like Poland and Baltics to continue despite domestic UK political change, really huge changes and huge investment within their own political and defense and security environment. This will really help overall to stabilize NATO internal signaling as the alliance prepares for the Hague summit. But at the same time, it's as well a quite clear sign that EU as well is joining its ranks, especially when we will look at the European Defence Fund. This is really a milestone and a key aspect of our engagement as Europeans, because this will encourage regional rearmament, especially now when we can see that US is slightly withdrawing or hesitant member of the NATO alliance. The global trust erosion, especially now what we can see with the various global security architecture, weakening overall as a global trust within the global policies and global players, which has happened. This will really show that we have to really step up. Enhancing European missile shields, for instance, will be something to do, like posturing to protect Baltic-Polish corridors.
Yes.
We have to ensure as well that we are investing, and European strategic autonomy will actually finally become a reality.
Ms. Kamila Zarikta-Romanovska, the Professor of European Union Law and Security Studies, thank you very much for your insights. From trade truces to defense dilemmas, London becomes the battleground for global stability. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode of In Focus. But stay tuned for more updates coming up here on Q News. I'm Henny Safe. Thank you for joining us.